So as we begin our conversation about biodiversity or plant biodiversity, we're first going to talk about land plant apomorphies. Apomorphies are the traits that kind of define a group. They're the traits that evolved in a common ancestor that were then carried on through all of the descendants, or most of them. And so it's the evolutionary signature of commonality between really close relatives. In this case, the land plants. So we're going to kind of move through a series of different apomorphies first. So what makes something a land plant? Well, there's a variety of apomorphies for all of land plants. A lot of them you should be familiar with already. The first one being parenchyma, so having some sort of parenchyma tissue. Remember, this is kind of unspecialized tissue, some sort of ground tissue. Parenchyma is used for storage, metabolism, respiration, photosynthesis, all of those different things. And they're also a little bit totipotent, so they can kind of change into other cells as they need to. So all land plants have parenchyma. They also all have apical growth, meaning they're going to grow from the tips and elongate. Now, remember, some can evolve secondary growth, like the dicots, but all of them have apical growth, with a few minor exceptions that we'll talk about. And that just means they're growing from the tips of shoots and roots. They also have a cuticle. So a cuticle, remember, is that waxy layer on the surface of the plant, primarily on the leaves, but also on stems, depending on which plant you're talking about. And it allows the plant to control how much water is lost and when it can breathe, taking in CO2 and out O2. And since the waxy substance, the cuticle on the top, repels water, they have these openings called stomata, right? The stomata are primarily on the underside of the leaves, but depending on the plant, they can be in different places as well. And they can open and close with the help of guard cells, allowing the plant to breathe and control water loss. Well, and this is really important, by the way, for when you're talking about land plants. Plants that are in the water, they don't really have to worry about that because they're not worried about losing too much water because there's water all around them. But on land, losing water is a huge risk, and so the cuticle becomes very important. Now, there's also Antheridia and Archegonia. Now, these traits are lost in the flowering plants. They've evolved different adaptations, but their ancestors did have these. And so Antheridia and Archegonia are the structures that produce the gametes, the egg and the sperm for the eggs. Now, in the males, the male has Antheridia. That's going to produce the sperm. You can see a little picture over here. You have a little plant structure here with some Antheridia that produce the sperm that will then go through fertilization or fertilize the egg. And then you have the Archegonia over here, which will receive the sperm and carry the egg. Now, we're going to begin our biodiversity talk with the seedless plants, and that's when these are going to come into play. These are absent in most of the seed plants. Now, we've talked about alternation of generations before. We're going to go in much more detail in our biodiversity lectures. But alternation of generations basically just means that plants go from gametophyte to sporophyte, and back and forth throughout like generations of the plant. For a lot of the seedless plants, they're going to be two separate structures. But when we get to talking about some vascular plants, especially like the angiosperms and gymnosperms, it becomes much more nuanced. And so we'll go into more detail there, but it's harder to distinguish the generations. Now, what's cool here is that one of these generations will be haploid, the gametophyte, and one of them will be diploid, the sporophyte. Remember, haploid means one copy of each chromosome, and diploid means two copies of each chromosome. We're going to ignore the fact that some plants can have more chromosomes than just two copies, but the same idea still holds. Now, what's going to happen with these alternation generations is you have a sporophyte, and it's going to produce spores. These spores are developed through meiosis. So it's going to go through meiosis, create 4 unique cells that are all haploid. They're going to grow into a gametophyte, meaning a multicellular haploid organism, right? That gametophyte isn't going to produce the gametes. If it's male, sperm. If it's female, egg. They'll send those out into the environment, however their ecology decides to manifest that. And when they fuse, they're going to go through the fertilization process, create a diploid zygote, which then creates a sporophyte. So the sporophyte creates spores, the gametophyte creates gametes, and the embryo is from the fusion of the gametes, which will then grow into the sporophyte. So some other major evolutionary adaptations here. One, roots and shoot systems, which we've talked a lot about now, right? Roots allow them to stabilize in the ground, access resources in the water. Shoot systems have evolved to move the plant upwards into better sunlight, better away from competition, better dispersal mechanisms. They also have lignin. So inside the woody structures of plants is a carbohydrate, which is the primary component of wood, is lignin, which is really hard to break down, which is one of the reasons why wood is so long lasting. They also have vascular tissue, so the xylem and phloem, like we've talked a lot about, for allowing them to move water and nutrients around. Again, if you're in an aquatic environment, you don't need those because there's water and nutrients all around you. But on land, you have to be able to move those to the parts of your body that you need. Then wood, again, that's a strong support mechanism that you don't really need in water. On land, you need those because it's going to help you resist gravity, help you outcompete other organisms, help you resist damage from other insects and stuff like that. They have, some plants have seeds, not all plants, just the seed plants do. Allows you to disperse usually without the mechanism of water. So a lot of the seedless plants will rely on water to disperse, and seeds kind of get you out of that. Flowers and fruits as well. So flowers to help for pollination and the fertilization process, and fruits to help you disperse those, usually either adding nutrients to your seed or allowing animals to come eat them and move the seed for you. So why was the movement of plants onto land such a big evolutionary event? Why is it so important? Well, a big piece of that is it sets the stage for other organisms. It allows animals and other organisms to dominate the landscape as well. One of the ways it did that is plants take in CO2, which is toxic to us, and emit O2. So it makes an O2 rich environment where then animals can then thrive, right? But also, when you take in CO2, you're removing greenhouse gases, which allowed the planet to cool down, which then also created a better environment for other organisms as well. Then it also just added more opportunities for different niches for different animals, right? It provides food sources for herbivores. It provides food sources for carnivores by allowing food sources for herbivores. It provides habitat, both two-dimensionally across the ground and three-dimensionally moving up. So it created a much more dynamic space on land where animals could begin to thrive. So it's really important for the diversity of plants, but also for the diversity of animals. And especially when you're tying that back into what we're talking about for plant science, which are both natural plants, but also crops and horticultural plants, all of those kind of stem from these same different evolutionary adaptations. Okay, so we're going to start to move into plant diversity in some other videos, but I kind of want to discuss where we're going to be going here. So we've seen this chart before in previous videos, but we have the streptophytes here, which are just the green plants. And we're primarily interested in the land plants, the embryophytes. We've talked about charophytes being kind of like the closest descendant of, or closest ancestor of those plants, which are down here. Now, we're going to talk first about non-vascular plants, which are all seedless plants. All non-vascular plants are seedless. Non-vascular, remember, meaning doesn't have xylem and phloem. They don't have those tissues to move nutrients around. So we're going to talk about the bryophytes, which includes liverworts, hornworts, and mosses. Now, if you look down here on this phylogeny, you can see just before liverworts, embryo protection developed. So they're starting to try and protect that embryo for land environments. Then after liverworts diverged off, we got apical growth, meaning liverworts actually don't have apical growth. And you can kind of see that in their growth patterns when we talk about them. But apical growth evolved before mosses and hornworts, and so you start to see the apical growth pattern inside of those plants. Then after hornworts and mosses diverged off, we got vascular tissue. So now we're in the seedless vascular plants. And here we have the club mosses and Selaginella and things like that, which aren't true mosses, but because they have vascular tissue. Then we start to get big leaves here, separating the lycophytes from the tridophytes. So we start to get megaphyll leaves, which you can see just means big leaves. And you can see that in a fern. A fern is a vascular seedless plant. Then after ferns diverge, we get to the seed plants. So seeds developed here, meaning gymnosperms and flowering plants, gymnosperms and angiosperms, are the two seed plants, big groups of seed plants. Now, gymnosperms produce seeds, but they don't produce flowers. So they're naked seeds, right? That's what gymnosperm means. They have seeds, no flowers with them. They do have cones, but they're not flowers. After gymnosperms diverge off, we get flowers. We get a process called double fertilization. We'll talk about later on. We get endosperm, nutrients for the embryo. We get fruits. We get flowers. All of that stuff happening here. And so flowering plants are here. Have all the different adaptations that we just talked about. And so we're going to begin by talking about the non-vascular seedless plants and then move into the vascular seedless plants. And we'll do that in the upcoming videos.